So in this segment, we're going to be kind of reviewing a Bloomberg op-ed piece, and I have some issues with the author. I think in some areas she was a bit lazy in some of the analysis she put in. So I've done my best to kind of compensate for that in those areas. But I think overall it's fair, saying a Labour, want to fix Brexit, good luck with that, and best of luck to him, Chief, honestly. So the Conservatives may own Brexit, but the issue is as awkward for Labour. Early this month, London Mayor Sadiq Khan broke a omerta on the subject. I wouldn't say he broke it, considering he's consistently said it for, I think, about 6 months now, and spat it out, quote, "After 2 years of denial and avoidance, we must now confront the hard truth. Brexit isn't working, it's weakened our economy, fractured our union, and diminished our reputation," end quote. And I think Sadiq Khan's been saying this for a good 6 months now. I'd be honest. He's been trying to fight back against kind of Starmer's Brexit stance and the rest of the country, really, it feels like. And Khan is interesting because he called for London to have its own immigration system as it struggles with huge staffing shortages. Maybe London should become its own city-state so we can watch them struggle. He also wants to try and save the City of London, the services, but he can't save that. Khan called for a discussion about rejoining the single market and the customs union, and we know it can't happen despite what other people, people like Phil tell you. We can't just rejoin the single market, and I'll have a bigger project coming out about that soon. But it makes sense for Khan to try and push this, as London is very pro-Remain, and it looks like he's fighting for the interests of the voters there. However, this isn't on Starmer's agenda, at least not for the next election. Instead, the party will focus on changes at the margins. In a major foreign policy speech last week, Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy said a Labour government would, quote, "aim to fix the Tories' bad Brexit deal to increase trade with Europe," end quote. And for me, the issue is that Labour are limited in what they want to do. A vet agreement, mutual recognition of certificates, and a few other things. Things that will help a bit, but not much. The Labour Party target voters are very different to Khan's, and the two, for the two to be so openly against each other is not a good look, i.e. kind of Starmer and Khan, but it's not an open feud in that sense. With each other at least. Lammy's proposal included fixing, that word again, the Northern Ireland Protocol, reducing friction on trade in agri-food, medicine and veterinary goods, strengthening mutual recognition of professional standards, and getting UK participation in the UK's Horizon funding scheme unblocked. So Labour cannot fix Brexit, in my opinion, because the damage it has done is catastrophic. They can make trade easier, but there are so many different issues here. EU traders will lose access to UK services, and things like financial services really carry the economy. Legal services are important too, but we are outside of the Lugano Convention, which means EU courts can ignore UK court rulings for any disputes that EU citizens or companies use the UK courts for. So, for example, if it's a ruling in Britain over some sort of dispute between people and a company, a Spanish court can say, yeah, that's nonsense, we're going to pass our own ruling, see ya. And, one of the ways the UK made a lot of money is people settling court cases in the UK because they saw our court system as pretty robust, which, in my opinion, it still kind of is, although the Tories have eroded it. The other problem here is that Keir Starmer has said that he's looking to make kind of a British standard for services, I think specifically for financial services, so we won't get any equivalency there. Labour can't fix these issues. We will still face customs fees and other kinds of checks. These are prohibitive for trade. We have a massive labour force shortage, which again, with no freedom of movement, cannot really be fixed. We don't have the expertise for some of the roles or the willingness for other roles. Labour do not understand the monsters that are facing down this country. The various Conservative positions on Brexit, which veer from denialism to deflection, great things, are even more problematic. In a speech at Bloomberg's European headquarters on the 27th of January, Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt spoke about the unheralded achievements and potential of the UK economy, but his language on Brexit betrayed the logical or maybe tautological problem for the Conservatives. Quote, "We need to make Brexit a catalyst for the bold choices that will take advantage of the nimbleness and flexibilities that make it possible," end quote. And if Brexit offers so many great opportunities, why does the government have to find ways to make it a catalyst? What he seems to be saying is necessity must be the mother of invention here, but that's hardly a defence of Brexit. I think, that's what the author said, and I think what he is saying, what Jeremy Hunt is saying, is outside the EU, we need to see where we can make changes in EU law that EU laws would not allow us to make, stuff like dangerous pesticides that kill bees, which would have played a large part in forming Solvency II, but outside of the EU we can do massive deregulation of it, which is a weird thing when you think about it because it went above EU minimum standards, because the EU set the minimum standards. The EU themselves are looking at reforming Solvency too, but they probably won't go as far as the UK will. This is what they mean by as a catalyst, I think. The chance to do things differently, maybe, to really cut down on EU regulations and go against kind of the norms that we have kind of in Europe for the most part. 3 years is certainly long enough to draw some conclusions. While it's tricky to separate Brexit, this is why I get really frustrated with people, because the author says why it's tricky to separate the Brexit effects from the pandemic and war in Ukraine. There are some clear patterns, and I think it's not the most difficult thing to do, but there's so much context needed. Comparing the UK to the Eurozone makes no sense because the Eurozone has so many diverse economies of different sizes. If we look at the G7, for example, which makes more sense because these are more comparable economies, obviously the US being the one you can't really compare with because it's the big boss of the platform. But if we look at, real terms, the G7 GDP change compared to the pre-pandemic levels, we are the only country, right? And this goes from Q3 2022 compared with Q4 of 2019, so just before the pandemic, right? You can see we're a -8% GDP compared with before the pandemic, right? Germany 0.4, Germany are up, Japan are up, France are up, Italy are up. The Eurozone is up, but again, we're not really going to compare with them. Canada and the US up, right? And you can argue they're not really impacted by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which makes sense. But mostly Germany and Italy most definitely would be. France, not so much because they produce a lot of their own energy. So the UK is still smaller than we were pre-pandemic. Now the context, Italy and Germany were far more reliant than the UK for Russian energy. In 2021, Russia was the main supplier of gas to Italy, with over 29 billion cubic meters of natural gas exported to this country, according to Statista, to Italy. With Germany, about half of the German imports are gas and hard coal, and about 1/3 of its oil imports originate from Russia, according to the London School of Economics. Now, for the UK in 2021, the UK imports from Russia made up about 4% of our gas used in the UK, and 9% of oil and 27% of coal, according to the House of Commons Library. Now, an issue with this could be, maybe that we weren't directly dependent on Russia. Maybe we bought it from Italy or Germany, for example, but I don't think that's the case. So really, the energy crisis should be hitting Italy and Germany far more than it's hitting us, yet we're paying more for energy than Italy and Germany have. So how does that make sense? In 2021, the UK exported $3.8 billion worth of goods to Russia, and you can argue we're a service-based economy. That's fine. Maybe we export services to Russia. I don't know. But Germany exported $31.5 billion worth of goods to Russia. Now, given all of this information, which country should be impacted by the global factors like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, given the fact that all of the sanctions the EU has done on Russia and that German trade with Russia would be heavily, heavily hampered? Tell me who should be struggling more. And Germany is the weakest other member of the G7. Italy, despite everything, is doing a lot better than us in terms of GDP growth. This is the kind of context that's needed when discussing figures, and this is what papers like Blomberg, despite this being an op-ed piece, should be doing a lot better on. And so should the FT. They should be breaking down the numbers and saying, look, how much trade do these countries do with Russia? How much trade has been lost because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? How much energy are we importing from Russia? These nations, right? Why is it that the UK is paying more than these nations for gas and electricity, gas and other forms of energy? Why is this happening? These are the things that really need to be looked at, and these are things that really, really frustrate me when other papers just won't do basics of research like this stuff and ask the question instead of, it's hard to disentangle the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the COVID pandemic. Well, I've just done it for you. Maybe it's at a very basic level, but I've just done it for you. This graph and this information here should be more than enough to say the UK is a global outlier. Why is that? What's going on here? The energy stuff won't be just as a result of Brexit. It'll be down to our stupid energy practices, but we do face major problems here at a governmental level, but also because of Brexit. That's the kind of context that we need in this country. Not this nonsense of, it's really difficult, so I don't want to do the work. When it's finally happened 3 years ago on the 31st of January, Britain's official departure from the EU came with a whimper rather than with a bang. Little changed on the surface, except the removal of the B word from political discourse, and that's because there was a transitional period. We did not fully leave the EU until the 1st of January 2021. Even then, we are not doing full import checks, so the full disruption won't be felt. So it wasn't the fact that when we officially announced our departure from the EU, we would have felt the impacts. It would have been after the transitional period. Like, come on, Bloomberg author, you can do better than this. But, yes, we don't don't really talk about Brexit as in the media, and neither do the two major parties. That avoidance has become harder to sustain in the light of evidence that Brexit is adding to Britain's economic woes. Polling agency YouGov reported late last year that 56% of the public regret voting for Brexit, 32% are still in favour. More recent polling shows the public have little confidence in either party on the issue. That's because they're talking nonsense about it. 3 years on, determined to avoid a new debate around Brexit, both parties are struggling to articulate a coherent narrative on what comes next. And I think with the country struggling so much, people are asking, what was the point of Brexit? Because it's really achieved nothing except worsening the economic prospects. You know, one of the Telegraph writers wrote a couple of weeks ago that no one voted to be poorer, and I think that's true. It's hard to break through how much damage Brexit has done to the average person, but I think people are slowly getting it. Maybe without better polling and direct quotation, we won't know yet. But if you ask people directly, you know, why have you suddenly turned against Brexit? I think that would be a more effective use of polling, and then we need demographics on top of that. But I think, sorry, I'm a bit animated in this video just because it's just very frustrating. A bit of a frustrating week, but yeah, pretty much we can kind of disentangle the effects of the pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine to an extent, and really talk about the impacts of Brexit from there, and also the ineptitude of the British systems. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.